The knock came just after sunrise, soft at first, then desperate enough to shake the quiet house. When Caspian Rowe opened the door, the woman next door stood there soaked from the morning rain, her mascara running, one heel missing, and fear trembling in her voice as she asked if she could stay the night even though the night had already broken into daylight. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of helping someone when they have nowhere else to go, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Sometimes one small act of compassion becomes the moment that saves a life. Caspian had lived alone for 3 years in the little blue house at the end of Briar Lane, where the maple trees leaned over the sidewalks like tired old guardians. He was the kind of man neighbors trusted with spare keys but rarely invited inside for dinner, not because he was unkind, but because grief had made him quiet. After his younger sister passed away in an accident he believed he could have prevented, Caspian stopped going to gatherings, stopped answering long phone calls, and built his life around simple routines. He woke early, made black coffee, watered the tomatoes behind the kitchen, repaired antique radios in his garage, and avoided anything that looked like emotional risk. Across the narrow yard lived a woman named Serafina Vale, who had moved in 6 months earlier with 2 suitcases, a wind chime, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Caspian had noticed her in small ways. She left for work every morning in neat dresses and returned carrying grocery bags like someone used to doing everything alone. She spoke kindly to the elderly mailman. She planted lavender by her porch. Sometimes, on sunny afternoons, she sat outside with a book open in her lap but stared at the street instead of reading. He never pried. He understood the language of people who looked normal from a distance but were quietly holding themselves together. That morning, when Serafina stood at his door shivering, Caspian's first instinct was panic. Not because he feared her, but because need had arrived in human form, and he had spent years avoiding exactly that. Her cardigan clung to her shoulders. There was a red mark near her wrist, not dramatic enough to announce a story, but real enough to stop him from pretending he had not seen it. She tried to apologize, tried to explain that her date had become strange after breakfast, that he had driven too fast, that she had asked him to take her home and he had refused, that she had finally jumped out of the car at a red light near the pharmacy and walked nearly 2 miles back through the rain. By the time she reached her own porch, she saw his car parked outside her house, the man waiting there, angry, watching, so she ran to Caspian's door because it was the only light she trusted. Caspian let her in without asking another question. He gave her a towel, closed the curtains halfway, and guided her to the kitchen table where the morning sun was beginning to glow through the wet glass. He did not touch her except to place a mug of warm tea near her shaking hands. For a long while, Serafina only stared at the steam rising from the cup, as if warmth itself was something she had forgotten she deserved. Caspian stood by the counter, feeling helpless, remembering another rainy morning years ago when his sister had called him crying and he had ignored it because he was busy, because he thought there would always be time later. There had not been. When a dark sedan rolled slowly past the window, Serafina froze. Caspian stepped into the hallway and locked the door. His heart began pounding, but something inside him had shifted. Fear was still there, but regret was stronger. He called the police non-emergency line first, then gave a clear report when the car circled back. He asked Serafina if there was anyone she trusted. She whispered the name of an aunt in another town, but said she had not spoken to her in years because pride had convinced her she needed to survive alone. Caspian understood that too well. As the morning stretched on, the rain softened into silver mist and the neighborhood slowly woke. A dog barked. A delivery truck passed. Children in yellow raincoats splashed toward the bus stop. Inside Caspian's kitchen, 2 lonely people sat across from each other with a silence that was no longer empty. Serafina told him pieces of her life, not all at once, but carefully, like handing over broken glass. She had once been a music teacher. She had moved to Briar Lane after leaving a long relationship that had taken her confidence piece by piece. The date had been her first attempt at beginning again. She had dressed nicely, told herself she was brave, and spent the whole morning ignoring the warning signs because she wanted so badly to believe the world could still be gentle. Caspian listened. He did not tell her she should have known better. He did not turn her pain into advice. He only listened, and somehow that became the first safe thing she had felt in a long time. Later, when an officer arrived and took her statement on the front porch beneath the gray daylight, Caspian stood nearby, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a witness. The man in the sedan was found 2 streets away, still waiting, still angry, still convinced he had the right to scare someone who had said no. By noon, Serafina's aunt had been contacted. By afternoon, the rain stopped, and sunlight fell across the wet street until every puddle looked like a small piece of sky. But the hardest part came after the danger left. Serafina looked toward her own house and suddenly began to cry again, because safety did not erase shame. She said she felt foolish, broken, too old to be afraid, too tired to start over again. Caspian, who had spent years blaming himself for a phone call he did not answer, finally said the truth he had never been able to say to himself. He told her that needing help was not weakness, and surviving something frightening did not make a person damaged. It meant they were still here. It meant there was still a door that could open. By evening, though the story had begun after a terrible date and a desperate knock, Serafina did not stay the night in Caspian's house. She stayed until she was strong enough to call her aunt, strong enough to pack a small bag, strong enough to stand on her porch without trembling. Caspian walked beside her in the golden late day light, carrying the bag while she locked her door. At the curb, before getting into her aunt's car, Serafina turned back and smiled through tired eyes. It was not a romantic smile, not yet, not the kind stories rush toward. It was something better. It was trust returning to a face that had almost forgotten how to hold it. Weeks passed, and Briar Lane changed in quiet ways. Serafina came home after staying with her aunt, this time with stronger locks, clearer boundaries, and a small rescue dog named Juniper. Caspian began leaving his garage door open while he worked on radios. Sometimes Serafina brought lemonade. Sometimes they sat outside in the afternoon while Juniper slept between their chairs. They did not pretend pain had vanished. They simply made room for joy beside it. Caspian eventually called his sister's old number, knowing no one would answer, and finally spoke the apology he had carried for years. Serafina returned to teaching music at a community center. On the first day of class, Caspian stood in the back as children sang off-key in the bright sunlight, and Serafina laughed with her whole heart. In that moment, he realized kindness had not only saved her from one frightening morning. It had saved him from becoming a locked door forever. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and leave a comment for Ancient Truth, because your support helps more stories of kindness, healing, and second chances reach people who may need them. Special request: comment a safe door can change a life if you believe one act of kindness can help someone begin again. And so, the woman next door did not simply knock in tears after her date. She knocked on the edge of 2 broken lives, and when Caspian opened the door, both of them found something they thought they had lost forever: the courage to trust daylight again.